tonight from the speakers, and then we hope you learned something from somebody else in this room. There's a lot of knowledge in this room, so connect with people, network, meet, learn, partner up, all things. Thanks for coming out tonight. Ryan Dekker is our speaker. He's a really cool guy. He's got 15 units, some very unique Airbnbs. Bought his first property in 2017, and he's going to tell his story and give some advice. So give it up for Ryan.
Thank you. All right. I got a few notes here.
Whatever you do, don't walk in front of this with the mic.
All right. So am I standing in view of this? Does that cover this whole area? I'm good? I'm good? Okay. Like Ryan said, I got started in 2017. I started actually right out of high school in 2000. Well, I was a little bit after high school in 2008. I started a software company. Kind of fell into it. I was freelancing, and so in 2008, real estate was not great, and so 2009 there was a bunch of programs, and I didn't want to just touch real estate at all. So I waited a long time until about 2013. I bought my first house to live in. Finally decided, okay, it's time to do that. And then kept running my software company. Then went through some changes in 2016 and 2017, and actually downsized it a little bit. And so I had a bunch of operating capital that I didn't have anything to do with, and so I was talking to a couple of friends, and they're like, well, you ought to think about real estate. And I was like, okay, like maybe I'm not as worried about the 2008 happening again, and understood a little bit more about markets and stuff, read some investment books. I tried the stock market first, actually, and that didn't go very well, and so then I ditched options and went into real estate. So at that time, I had a lease downtown Colorado Springs, and so the first two properties that I bought, the short-term renting was like not even in my head, so I did. The first property I bought was a Section 8 house rental off of Pikes Peak down here, and it was pretty cheap, and so did that. And the great thing about Section 8, if you don't already know, Section 8 is government funded. There's two levels of classification. There's 30% government funded and 70% government funded. So this was a 70% government funded based on their income situation. So that more than paid the mortgage, and then the tenant was responsible for paying their own utilities and stuff like that, and then only just paid me a couple $100 for rent because the rest was funded by Section 8. So in terms of low risk situations, I mean, some people have had issues with lower income people and Section 8. But for me, that was a great tenant, and had them for like 4 years before I finally sold the place. But anyway, so that was kind of my intro into being a landlord, I guess, is having Section 8. And yeah, so like I said, I mean, it felt pretty low risk because I was already covering it with, easily covering it, even if they didn't pay rent. It felt like a pretty good insulated bet. And then my second bet was buying a commercial building, and so my lease was coming up, and so I moved my software company from the building, or from downtown up off of Garden of the Gods into some of the industrial stuff up there, and I still have that building now, and that has been just great. That was about maybe like 30% more than what I was paying for rent, just by being able to move into a different area. So I got that loan with Integrity Bank and Trust, which if you haven't worked with them, they're great for commercial stuff, and they're really good to work with. So that was a little bit of a different loan. So that was Colorado was running a program on it, so I only had to put 10% down because it was going to be owner occupied, and then the government put down, I can't remember, the state of Colorado had like a small business thing, not SBA, but like Colorado's version of the SBA, and they covered the other 15% for a period of I think 3 years, and so I had 3 years to pay the other 15% off, which happened actually just as equity or just as appreciation happened. I gained the equity, and I never had to actually deal with it. Um, so yeah, so that was a pretty good deal, and it was that was a 10-year note with a 25-year amortization. So it kind of suppressed it a little bit, but I figured still within gave me 10 years to kind of deal with stuff. And anyway, so that was the first non-conventional, or I guess commercial kind of thing that I'd done. So the way I dealt with that, I mean, it was already just a good deal to pay just a little bit more, and I figured, okay, we'll get hopefully some appreciation and stuff. But we were only taking about half of the building, and so what we did is on the other half of the building, the whole thing had. So the whole thing has 14 offices. So it's a pretty small thing, and we took up about what did we take? I think we took up about like 6 or 8 of them initially, and then rented out the rest of them as individual offices. So rather than doing like a big long lease, I was doing month to month on individual offices. It was kind of before co-working was a thing, and so. So at one point I was thinking, oh, maybe we'll turn it into a co-working space, but we kind of like tried a little bit and felt like there wasn't enough demand, especially up there as opposed to like downtown. So we did that, and I've had pretty good success with it. I'd say like for the majority of the time that I've had that building, even though we were taking up half of it, I was not having to pay both halves, or like the half that we were renting was paying for the mortgage and the HOA fees and utilities and all of that. So it's been a pretty good like kind of hack into kind of moving forward. So even though like the bet felt small because like, okay, it's just a little bit more than we're paying in rent, the way it ended up panning out that helped kind of propel things forward for me was that, again, I was more than guaranteed to, not guaranteed, but consistently have been paying the mortgage through rent. So that was 2017. 2018, I was talking to a friend of mine, and that's when I first got into short-term renting. So short-term renting, then at that point, it was like pretty newer and not as prevalent stuff. It was before Colorado Springs regulated anything. I looked it all up. Colorado Springs is like, yeah, sure, as long as you pay your taxes. I'm like, great, I'll pay taxes. So bought a new house with a walkout basement so that could rent the basement out, and then took the house that I had been living in and turned that into an Airbnb, and that's worked out great. Again, the basement has covered the mortgage, and the old house had super low interest rate from 2013, and so it just kind of all worked really well, and that was all self-managed. It was easy because it was just a couple of units. So did that and felt pretty good about it. But right about the time that we finally, so it was an unfinished basement when we got the walkout. So wrapped all that, refinished it, and kind of fixed it up. Like I was gonna say nice, like medium nice, right? Like because we figured it'd get some wear and tear. So did that, and then right around the time that got listed, Colorado Springs said, well, actually, we were kind of pumping the brakes on short-term rentals. We're thinking about permitting and maybe not doing this. And so went to all this kind of stuff in 2019 and said, okay, well, maybe, while it's still in discussion, let's try and get some more. So I talked to my dad, and he and I kind of went in together, and we got 3 more in 2019. I wish we had done more, but anyway, so those are still grandfathered into R1 zones. Now, in order to do short-term renting, you've got to be an R2 or county or something like that. So that was a pretty busy summer launching all of those. Let's see, yeah. So this is one of them, and started getting a little bit smarter about the types of properties that I was targeting. So all of the stuff that we bought in 2019 kind of fit a certain criteria, because I was still risk averse, more so than I am now. You know, I mean, if you're kind of seeing my progression every time I was looking to buy something, it was, let's make sure that I've got a pretty decent way to cover this, because I don't want to like end up like upside down or something like that. So all of these properties we were able to buy back then, where we figured worst case we're going to be able to rent these for maybe like 5 or 10% more than our costs on them. So like they're not going to be like great, but like worst case we'll be covering kind of the like a return. That's not a return. Our return on them probably would have been like maybe 3 to 5%. So probably not great as long-term rentals, but they're at least covered as if we were going to convert them to long-term renting, because we still weren't sure that short-term renting was going to work. We still weren't sure that short-term renting wasn't going to get banned or something like that at that point. So we're trying to like hit it from a couple of angles. And the other thing that we were looking for in 2019 was stuff that's well below the county loan limit, because we wanted to be able to offload them easy. And if you're below the county loan limit, then you can appeal to FHA buyers and you know, basically the whole spectrum all the way up, as opposed to like nicer properties or something like that that need jumbo or some sort of special financing. And so we were looking to avoid all of that kind of headache potentially if we needed to offload them. So these all met that criteria. This is in Briargate area. We got in that period we got 2 in Briargate and then 1 over kind of off of Powers, which has done pretty well. But I really like. I've found that the shorter distance to all the major attractions, the better something does. And so the nice thing about Briargate has got pretty good interstate access. So it means if someone's coming for the Air Force, or if they're coming for Garden of the Gods, or even if they want to go downtown, it's got pretty good access. Where the stuff off of Powers kind of alienates some people in the city. So that one hasn't been as good. But you know, I mean, Briargate, especially, there's no R2 stuff up in Briargate, and so these have done pretty well. The couple that we got up in Briargate. Yeah, and so these are basically suburban homes, and but what we're looking for is the more bedrooms, the better. Kind of like a bedroom per dollar is basically what I was looking for, along with kind of some of the features. So this one had a bunch of it's a pool and a play place, and had a trampoline, hot tub up on the deck. And I was also looking for peak view, because I figure if people come into Colorado Springs, we want to be able to say, you know, you can see the mountains, right? And so that was kind of the criteria that we were going for. Again, kind of within a suburban, normal, you know, basically a normal house that we thought we could also rent pretty well. And that formula has worked pretty well for me. So we took that all the way out into. So we did that with 2019. 2020 was obviously an interesting year for everybody, including short-term renting. So we kind of pumped the brakes on buying anything in 2020. But one of the decisions that I'm happy we did make is my dad and I were talking, and we're like, okay, at what point do we like switch these to long-term rentals, or at least like medium-term rentals? You know, this is like March, April. We're going into summer. Things are looking pretty bad, and what we actually ended up deciding to do is just keep running them as short-term rentals, and it panned out in a great way. So we had people like quarantining in the houses, and like we more than covered the mortgage. We were kind of like, okay, maybe once we've lost like 20,000, we'll we'll move it over to something else. Like, you know, that's kind of our fault limit. We never lost any money. Maybe I think like April and some of May. But 2020 ended up being a great year, and I talked to other people who ended up doing medium-term rentals, and they ended up with 3-month rentals that ran over the summer when everybody wanted to be traveling, and especially because people didn't want to be going to hotels where they're sharing airspace with people. You know, it was great for short-term rentals. So we really lucked out that we kind of had the risk tolerance to be able to kind of stay in it, and just kind of figure out like what that line was before we were gonna, you know, abandon ship, where I think other people were more worried about it being like a big deal. So I mean, hard to forecast for sure. Let's see. Yeah, so 2020 hit and money was cheap again. And 2021 hit and money was cheap again, and a lot of people were buying a bunch of cash everywhere, and so appreciation was kind of going up, and so and as it turned out, despite how like worried I was about 2020, it was a pretty good cash year for me, both with my software company as well as with my with our rentals, because we've been able to run it all year long, and like crazy stuff. Like we had like really good October, November, which is usually kind of coming back into slow season, but people were like still itching to travel, still didn't want to do hotels, and so we had like crazy good years towards the end of the year there, or crazy good months, I should say. Usually the seasonality kind of goes like, you know, Memorial Day through Labor Day, and obviously 2020 wasn't like that. So anyway, going into 2021, decided we were going to branch out a little bit more, and buy a few properties. One of the first moves that I did is I took my Section 8 rental that had almost doubled in value in the last 4 years, and I did a 1031 exchange to get out of the long-term game kind of and move up into Monument. So I took a property off of Pikes Peak, and we bought a 2-unit property up in Monument. Well, actually, what I did is, again, I worked with Integrity Bank and Trust and got a commercial loan on the deal, and they gave us kind of a credit based on an appraisal of kind of forecasting what the value would be. And so it had a detached garage. And so what we did is we scrubbed the detached garage and turned it into a 2-bedroom unit. And now we're short-term renting both units. So,
hey Ryan, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
How are you getting the funding for a lot of these deals that you're doing?
Yeah, so good question. So in a lot of it was my software company, and then a lot of it was I was taking certain things that I was used to spending money on, and I was able to apply that because things worked out well, right? So like I took the house that I had, and like I was used to paying a mortgage, and then because I put a Airbnb in the basement, I was able to cover the cost of the mortgage, and then make some on top of that. And so then that was money that we had, every year coming in to do it. And the same thing had happened with my software business, where I was used to paying, rent for that, and I didn't have to pay that anymore because it was being covered and then some by tenants. So it just kind of kept on rolling forward, and I just took everything that I was making from those things working well and applied them into the next thing. So, anyway, so 2021, I did the 1031 exchange, which was a pretty good deal. We didn't have to pay taxes on kind of basically swapping a property that was pretty good for what it was, but turn that equity and actually start harvesting the equity for the revenue. And then that year, I was like, okay, Colorado Springs and Colorado feels like we're kind of not very diversified. Colorado Springs doesn't really want us here. I don't want to be like pushing the limits too much. And so we decided to buy 3 properties down in 4 units down in Florida. And so up in the Destin area, and I'd read some stuff and it seemed like a pretty good bet. And so, yeah, this is one of them. Again, these kind of like fit my model of being real, pretty basic. Like it's a suburban home, but it looks like just a little bit nicer with the palm trees and stuff like that. So it like kind of, anyway, just trying to like hack into like something that looks good and checks a lot of boxes. This one has a pool as well. And so, and it actually has a unit back here, a detached garage with a studio over it. And so this is actually two units is how we ended up buying it, and then listing it as both units. But it's just normal. Otherwise, it's just a normal suburban home. And so we actually sold this last year, and it was probably our weakest sale. We still made money in appreciation, but everything else in this area is actually appreciated quite a bit more. This city specifically has been kind of lagging. That was my attempt at kind of hacking around what felt like pricier areas, being like within 30, 40 minutes of those areas, and it didn't really pan out. But anyway, we still made money on the appreciation. But this property we ended up selling despite the lack of appreciation relatively, because it was close enough to the water that insurance was just insane, and it just kept on ticking up. And Florida's had, between the hurricanes and some laws that they've passed to try to offset people like working the insurance companies, that tried to make it hard, and so then it's driven up insurance costs. So we've got one more that's under contract down there, and we'll clear it out of the 3 that we bought in 2021 because it's just too hard to manage remotely, I found. And we probably could have done a better job of it if we were a little bit bigger, but like 3 was like too few to like really have a good network down there, and too many to like make it easy to manage. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm not a huge fan of property managers because I think they're a little bit overpriced. Am I allowed to say that?
I don't know any property management.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so the problem is that the game is, they take kind of like the top 20% off profits, and so, and I don't think they need that much.
Not the profits, not your gross.
Well, yeah, off the gross, right? But I mean, they get the first 20-30%, whatever the number is, that each right in it. So if we're talking a property that say it does 100,000, and we've got all of our expenses, and so we're spending whatever 70,000. Well, if we can figure out how to run that business for a lot less than 30,000, it's a pretty good deal. If we give 20% of it away, and now we've only got 10. We could have, but it's like at that point I'd almost rather long-term rent or something like that, because I think the numbers almost work better at that break point. Yeah. So and maybe we should have, like, we explored it a little bit, and I talked to some people, but a lot of especially down in this area, like there's multi-million-dollar houses and stuff. It's one of the most expensive areas it's like 100 miles away from the most expensive area in the States. A bunch of like $30-50 million mansions and stuff. So, and it's not very densely populated. It's not urban. That's the other thing I kind of learned. And it's up in the Panhandle, so it's actually more seasonal than Colorado Springs, where if we'd gone south, it wouldn't have been as seasonal. So anyway, I made a couple of mistakes, learned kind of through it. I mean, we still made money with it, but it hasn't been as lucrative as we had hoped. So let's see. Should I talk about the bubble? Okay. So one other thing I did in 2021, as I was trying to get out of Colorado Springs, is we got a property on the backside of Pikes Peak up near Cripple Creek, and so it's a 7-acre lot that had 2 units on it already. It had a stick-built house and or just a regular house, and a trailer on it that we flipped. And but because it was 7 acres, I figured, well, let's play around with doing a couple of other things. And so we did 2 other properties on it. We did a inflatable bubble and a tiny home. So the inflatable bubble was a super sweet deal. It was very expensive to keep inflated, if you can believe it. Electricity is expensive up there. The electric bill on that was maybe like $600-700 a month or something. But there's no mortgage, no nothing. Like we were maybe like all in this for like $25,000 or something like that, and that's about what I think we grossed like that first year, like $35,000 or something. So about like didn't. In case you're wondering, we lost money in the first year. Like, it hadn't totally covered everything, but way better than like a mortgage situation or something like that. However, it hails a lot on the backside of Pikes Peak, and so this thing is actually dead. So we're in the process of launching a new one that I unfortunately don't have a picture of, that is not inflatable and is a little bit more little higher grade plastic. And and that one actually you can only see out of the front. So again, kind of another lesson learned. But I was actually really surprised with how well it did. I mean, even in slow season, we were getting like very often $100 a night out of it, and I think that's pretty good for a tent. So yeah.
Someone in there when it died from hail?
Well, it was kind of a gradual death. Yeah. And zippers were tearing anyway. So yeah, inflatables anyway. So we got maybe like 15 months of use out of it, which about covered it. And then we still have the deck, and we learned just a ton of stuff from it. I mean, everything that I've done has been kind of like, oh, let's try something else, see if this will work. And then obviously like the lot was already paid for. And what's up?
Is that attached to the house?
Actually, we have a composting toilet in there, which I thought for sure we were going to get bad reviews on, and like maybe 5 people complained about it, and everybody else thought it was actually pretty cool. So, yeah. And the other thing that we have up on this property is a tiny house that I bought, also cash, for a little bit more. This is it. And I thought that the novelty of that would be pretty cool. And I'll say it's been pretty mediocre. So anyway, we're thinking about, instead of having it up there, I think part of the issue is that it's too far out of the way. And so like if you're looking for just like to stay there, then like if you want the novelty, it's a cool place. But if you want like to have the novelty and also like bounce around, it's kind of like too far away from stuff. So what we might do is move this into like a better location somewhere. That's the nice thing about tiny homes, you can move them.
How much did you pay for the tiny homes?
I got it used for I think about 40,000. I think they're a little bit more than that now, but anyway, it's not like RV certified, but I was still able to get it insured. I had to do a little bit of hunting on it, so it's pretty expensive insurance, but anyway. So yeah, so that's been kind of our experience. I'll just mention that we also did finally get an R2 zoned house here in the Springs, which has been like okay, but I think it's a pretty densely Airbnb area, and then we've got one in the county here in Colorado Springs that's not where outside of Colorado Springs jurisdiction, so we didn't have to get a permit on that one, and that was a little bit pricey, kind of for what it is, I think. And so like both of those, I'd say, are kind of mediocre. Hopefully, I think as Colorado Springs continues to go, there'll be a good appreciation play, and they're at least still covering the mortgage and stuff like that. But probably not as cool as like the properties that we're getting in Briargate and stuff, when we kind of had the whole market to look at, But so anyway, I think that's our deal.
Cool. Questions?
What do you do for property management then?
I played around with a couple of different things. So when I had my software company, I sold my software company in 2021 and started doing this full time. And the first thing that I tried after selling my software company was hiring a couple of property management companies. And we took a pretty big hit in terms of quality of like our revenue went down and our reviews went down, and like it just anyway. So maybe it's because I was too cheap, kind of trying to offset the. Anyway, weren't too good of a deal. That maybe it wasn't as good of a deal. But so after that, I decided to bring it back in-house. When I had my software company, it had been like loosely in-house because I already had administrative staff, and so I just kind of tacked a couple of people onto that. And then since then, what I ended up doing is hiring a communication agency that handles all the guest communication, and hooked up a couple of different automations to help us on like the bookkeeping stuff, and hired a salaried maintenance guy that just bounces between all of our properties in Colorado, obviously not the Florida ones. And then I've got a couple of part-time admin assistants here as well that help kind of run everything and deal with escalations from the communication staff. And I don't know, it's been okay. It's cheaper than property management. I won't claim that like I've totally got it dialed in though. Anything else?
What's the worst guest you've ever had?
I don't know. Let's see. Oh, we had somebody use the pool cover as a waterbed, and they were like jumping on the pool cover. They tore it, did like $8,000 worth of damage, and Airbnb covered it. They sent an adjuster out. I think there's a $3,000 break point where if you make a claim over that, then they send out an adjuster, which I think we've only had to do twice. So that one we had like 100 kids. So anyway, that was an interesting thing. Yeah, neighbors called us on that, and anyway, and code enforcement too, in case you're wondering.
What made you look at the Cripple Creek market? Was it the gambling traffic that goes up there, the proximity to Colorado Springs, or what was?
Yeah, so I actually did a second home loan on the Cripple Creek one. So I was looking for something outside of 50 miles, but like just outside of 50 miles so that I could justify it as a second home. And so that kind of fit that bill. And it's a different enough of a location that it kind of made sense. And actually, I really love the space and the property. It's super quiet. Yeah, I was hoping that Cripple Creek would kind of continue to do well. And I think it has a little bit, but I don't know that they've bounced back fully from the pandemic. I mean, it's nothing like Black Hawk or something. It's been okay though. I think the real ticket with Cripple Creek is that we've got so many options because it's like more off grid, and so like we're not bugging neighbors as much, and so we had the acreage to kind of play with it. So
I have a question about the section.
yeah.
How did you find that, and would you recommend again doing that as your first time?
I found it by looking. I mean, I don't know what the landscape on that looks like right now, but I looked for something that already had a tenant. It was kind of my criteria on that. I was looking for like relatively cheap stuff because I didn't want to. So that one I bought for 170 and put 40 down. It was like a totally different Colorado Springs than is there today. Yeah, and then sold it for 300 with like 20 offers on it. So yeah, so 2017 was a little bit different, but yeah, I looked for something that had a tenant already because I didn't want to have to like deal with all of that, and then ended up finding something that had a Section 8 tenant. And yeah, I think Section 8 was pretty good. Again, I haven't kept up with it since 2021 when I got rid of it, but I didn't have a bad experience. And Section 8 tenants like they don't want to lose their status, so there's a lot of pressure to be a good tenant. So I think you run into some issues with like culture and stuff like that, where like maybe you run into some stuff, but like, and I've heard horror stories of like Section 8 tenants having like, you know, meth and whatever. So like there's definitely risk, but I think there's risk with any tenant, and I think it's nice to have like most of it kind of covered. So I would do it again. Yeah, I had a pretty good experience with it.
I know you mentioned once that at least once you had a commercial loan, but were all the rest of your loans just like standard mortgages?
Yeah, let me think. Almost all of them were conventional. There's we got a condo. One of the units that we got in Florida was a condo. It's unwarrantable, which means we had to put 30% down, and it's not non-conventional, so it's not Fannie Freddie government backed. So it's a higher interest rate. Never did a debt service coverage or anything like that. I looked at it, but I think it's a little bit more risky than kind of my tolerance right now, just because they're so aggressive on. Anyway, anyway. I would consider it, but I wouldn't want too many. And so like a big part of this was I was dealing with my dad, and he's been a partner with a lot of this, and he was saying, well, let's not go too like risky, because like you've got enough time to recover. I don't necessarily like if I can't afford to like lose a bunch. So like that's made me be more conservative. Like we did everything else that we did, other than the the place up in Cripple Creek, we did 25% down. So like trying to kind of insulate and not be as aggressive as I know you could be with like FHA or some of those products. But yeah. Did I answer the question? I may have trailed. Okay.
So with Briargate properties, do you
Yeah.
see trends database for STRs?
I think Briargate's a good area
For STRs?
for STRs. Yeah. In part because you can't.
Short-term rental, sorry.
Yeah, for short-term rentals. In part because you can't get them anymore, right? Like there's no R2 zones, at least not that I'm aware of, like anywhere near there. And the county areas are pretty pricey. Like I know there's a county strip off of like Old Ranch Road, and then there's another county strip like off of what is it, like north of Woodman, kind of next to the interstate there. Although you have the train to deal with there, but like most of the houses in there are over $1 million, and so that doesn't really fit my model unless I could put multiple units on it.
The reason I'm curious is I have a 5-bedroom in Briargate, and I'm like torn, like do I do STR and TR, medium term rentals? Do I house hack? Like I'm trying to figure out.
Okay.
So a medium term rental in TR, and then you have short term like Airbnb, and then I was looking at doing a house, also looking at house hack, doing individual rooms. So I'm just kind of torn of like which, because I was thinking the short term wouldn't do so well in Briargate.
I think it would actually, because there's not a lot of hotels around there. Well, there's becoming more hotels there with InterQuest, but I think it's a pretty good area for it. He does a lot of house hacking, so he's probably the guy to talk to about that. But I think medium term can work, and then you don't need a short-term rental permit. So that's anything over 29 days, and that's not. I mean, it's a little different.
Splitting it in the basement as maybe a medium or a short term, and then doing house hacking.
Yeah, so I don't know what the laws are around all of that kind of stuff, but I think generally it's frowned upon to do some of that. But so it depends on your risk tolerance on. If you already have the house, and if you live there for 185 days, then you can do the owner occupied.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So I think owner occupied is totally the way to go on a lot of that stuff because it's so exclusive.
I got a question.
All right.
You made some great bets and some great investments. It's a little harder to scale today because equity is staying a little flat over the last year or two, and interest rates are way higher. So, what would your advice be to someone who's sitting in the crowd thinking, "I would like to scale to 15 units one day, but I'm not sure how to do that"?
Yeah, it's definitely harder now than it was when I got started, and I got pretty lucky, honestly, I feel like, on a bunch of stuff. But I still think the profile that I've used can carry forward. So underneath the county loan limit, like a normal spec house that has like a little special something, I think can work pretty well. I still like the idea, and I think it's easier now. Maybe not. I think it's still easy to largely, maybe not exclusively, but largely cover the mortgage with a long-term rental. So I'd like to get a property that I have multiple exit strategies on, just to kind of insulate myself from things doing whatever they do. I mean, some of this will depend on global pressures, but my general feeling is that rates will probably come down in the at least medium-term future. So next few years. And, so even though you might be paying higher rates right now, you can always refinance in a few years. It's not something where you've got to, so you can kind of like weigh that into your expense picture. And so if it's a good property, and when they do, I think property values will go up. I think Colorado Springs is still desirable. And so property values are going to go up regardless, just because people want to live in Colorado and in Colorado Springs. Colorado Springs is still way cheaper than Denver. So I think there's a lot of things that are propping it up, especially if you're in that affordability zone where people going for an FHA can still get it. So like I would be disinclined to get the more expensive properties. So I think that's a good starting point, is like checking multiple boxes, having multiple exit plans, and and a lot of that will depend on your risk tolerance. My risk tolerance is actually reasonably low. Like I like to make sure that I've got multiple ways to get out, and like I've run scenarios on like, okay, if things decline, how much is this going to hurt? How long am I going to hold it for? You know, and I like to think about too, like if I'm renting it, say for 10% under what Zillow thinks, long-term rent because short-term renting is no longer working or whatever for whatever reason. What's going to be the net cost on that, factoring in vacancy and stuff like that? And if I'm going to be losing $10,000 a year for a couple of years, I can stomach that on a property that was kind of a miss, and then ride it out, and then hopefully it comes back up. So, but I wouldn't want to be in a situation where I'm so leveraged that I'm like 5% down and like all, I wouldn't want to be in that situation where I end up upside down and losing $10,000 a month or $10,000 a year or something on the property. That would be a scary scenario for me. So I think it's picking a good property that has multiple stability points and exit plans. So.
You mentioned something about a dollar to bedroom ratio. Can you expand on that a little bit?
I mean, I don't know if there's a real ratio there, but what I will say is a couple of things. First off, Colorado Springs only allows up to 15 people in a house.
Say that again.
Colorado Springs only allows. Sorry, have I been talking really quiet?
Yes, I have.
Colorado Springs only allows up to 15 people in a house, and their formula for permits is two people per bedroom plus two. And so the more bedrooms that you have, the higher permit you can get. And so then the more people you can get into the house. So like you can always put 2 people in a 6-bedroom house. You can't put 12 people in a 2-bedroom house under current permits, and you probably don't want that group of people anyway. And so, but a lot of times the price on actually purchasing the property is not substantially different, right? Like the difference between a 3-bedroom house and a 6-bedroom house is nowhere close to like buying 2 3-bedroom houses. And so I like to get as many bedrooms as possible so that we check that box. So then even in slower season, I can drop my price and be a better unit than the 3-bedroom house, even if we're priced the same, because you just get a little bit more for it. So like you might as well. And so then we end up getting the booking, and the 3-bedroom remains vacant. Our competition remains vacant. So I don't necessarily have a here's the ratio that I'm going for, but that's kind of the thought process behind it. Yeah. All right.
Thanks, Ryan. Give it up for Ryan.
Appreciate you. Thanks, Ryan.
Cool. All right, I got a couple closing thoughts. If the goal is